Hello and welcome to People Who Matter. In recent years, whilst our attention has been focused on HIV/AIDS, it seems that the problem of cancer and the care of cancer patients has been relegated to the background, if not altogether ignored. There are reports that the disease is growing 20 times, perhaps even 30 times faster. And there are claims that in the next 2 decades, 1 out of 13 Indians could contract the disease. If proven true, that would be a truly worrying scenario. Now, my guest today is a survivor of the disease. Diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in the mid-80s, she spent 5 agonizing years wondering if she would live. But after a complete recovery, she's dedicated her life to supporting cancer patients and providing palliative care. Her silent struggle might not have attracted newspaper headlines or made television documentaries, but it's made a world of difference to cancer patients who can now die with dignity. I'm talking, of course, of the President of CanSupport and Cancer Sahyog, Harmala Gupta. Welcome to the program, Harmala.
Thank you, Karan.
Today, with both the government and the media focusing their attention on HIV/AIDS, is it true to say that cancer and the care of cancer patients has either been relegated to the background or perhaps even ignored?
Well, Karan, I certainly don't want to devalue the importance of HIV/AIDS. I think it is a very pressing issue and needs to be addressed. But I do feel that in our part of the world, there is going to be a phenomenal increase in the rates of cancer. And we need to plan for this. And we need to have services in place that are going to provide the services for people who are going to come increasingly with advanced cancers.
Let's for a moment talk about the size and scale of the potential problem on our hands. Although we only have 2.5 million or thereabout cancer sufferers today, I'm told that the rate of growth is 7 or 8 lakhs a year, which, if true, is almost 25 or 30 times the rate of growth of HIV/AIDS.
That's very true. So, we are looking at something that's going to be absolutely phenomenal. And the question is, what are we doing about it? And I think that is sad for some of us who are working in this
it's not
area.
just phenomenal. The figures suggest that in 20 years' time, 1 out of 13 Indians could have contracted cancer, which means that we could have a population in excess of 75 million who are victims of the disease.
You're absolutely right. And the question is, given this, why aren't we addressing this more seriously? And I suspect, Karan, that part of that has to do with the fact that sometimes the priorities that dictate our health system don't necessarily reflect the actual situation at home.
You mean they're decided by bureaucrats or they're decided by politicians rather than by the reality of people suffering in their individual cases?
I think that they're also to a large extent decided by where the money comes from and for what. And I suspect right now most of the money that's coming is coming for HIV/AIDS, which is deciding our priorities at home, despite the fact, as you say, that cancer is going to see a phenomenal and amazing increase.
Now, as you say in your writings, the most tragic thing about Indians who get cancer is that 80% of them are detected when they're at a terminally ill stage. Why is it left so late?
Well, I think that we don't have enough consciousness in terms of having regular health checkups. People don't realize that cancer is very much part of life today, and one needs to be aware of that. We have certain lifestyles and habits that we are not willing to give up, plus the fact that there are hardly any nationwide campaigns aimed at screening people for cancers that are widespread in India.
So in a real sense, it's what you might call the forgotten disease, and as a result, when people get detected, they're at a terminally ill stage. In other words, they're on the brink, sadly, of dying.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, doctors still try their best, but to a large extent, it is a losing battle.
You know, you say doctors try their best, but in your writings, you often suggest that the problem of cancer patients in India is not helped and eased by hospitals and doctors. It's often compounded by their attitudes.
Well, I think that it's a bit more complex than that, in the sense that when we come to hospitals in our country and approach doctors, we give them a status that is near God-like, and we expect them to pull a miracle. And that doesn't happen. And doctors find it equally difficult to convince people that their hands are tied. And so there is this, unfortunately, both these situations feed into each other. So we have tragically people being given more and more chemotherapy or more and more radiotherapy, which is of an aggressive nature, at a time when really it is time to stop these treatments and concentrate on improving the quality of their lives.
Which is why you say that palliative care is so badly needed in India.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, with 80% of the cancer population coming with advanced disease, this is where the majority of your resources should be spent in providing these services and making them as widely possible to the public in your treating centers and elsewhere, even in your primary centers, because this is not very highly sophisticated care.
In fact, in an article that you wrote in one of the newspapers earlier this year, you said of palliative care that it was a way of ensuring that the terminally ill die with dignity. In fact, you wrote, otherwise there will be no good death. They will only be waiting, and the waiting is very long. I think I understand what you're talking about, but why don't you express it a little bit more fully for others?
Well, I think people need to understand that when we are talking about palliative care, we're talking about making people as comfortable as possible without using intrusive methods or techniques to do that. And I think this is really very much within medical ethics, where a particular diagnostic technique or any other, even treatment, is only used if you're expecting that it's going to lead to the benefit of the patient without doing any harm. And what we're saying is, once you know someone is dying, and dying is a natural process, what you need to do is help that person, help that family, facilitate that process, whether it means taking care of symptoms like pain, nausea, etc., or dealing with the psychological and social side of dying, rather than rushing people into ICUs, hooking them up to machines, and that kind of a situation is terribly painful.
In fact, what you talk about seems so obvious when you explain it, and yet the amazing thing is that palliative care is either ignored or completely forgotten about in India. Why is that the case? Why don't Indian doctors understand the need for this total support for those who have no other hope except to die with dignity?
Well, I think to some extent because palliative care really isn't taught in medical schools in India.
Absolutely not.
No, it's not in the medical curriculum.
That's a lacuna in the system.
That's an absolute lacuna. And so people don't see it as a subspecialty in its own right. They don't see it going anywhere for them in terms of a career.
It's not glamorous, it doesn't bring in money?
It doesn't bring in money, exactly. And sadly, that's the reason why palliative care doesn't attract very many doctors, though privately they absolutely say it epitomizes the heart of medicine. It's the reason why they got into medicine.
It's the caring aspect of it.
It's the caring aspect, exactly.
In a sense, all of this must have become obvious to you in 1986 when you were in Canada and you got cancer yourself. It must have come as a terrible shock.
It was a terrible shock because I was young and I never thought that cancer could enter my life. I didn't have any so-called bad habits. And so from that point of view, yes.
You weren't a smoker.
Not
you
at
weren't
all.
leading a lifestyle
Not
that would
at
in
all.
any invite danger.
As a matter of fact, you know, I was one of the healthiest people around it, so I thought. So it was a shock. And plus the fact that I was in the middle of a PhD thesis, which I had to finish. I had a 3-year-old son. So there were all kinds of issues. I was sort of on the brink of life, and it was a sad
At the time, you must have been
diagnosis.
terribly frightened. Did you lose hope at any point?
Well, I think, you know, one rides a roller coaster, really, of emotions. And there's hope, there's sadness, there's fear, there's grief. You're battling with a whole host of emotions. But you have to hang on to hope. And for you to do that, you really need good support from your family, and from those in the medical system.
In fact, one of the things you often say is that the doctors and the whole medical system in Canada helped support you and helped nurture your belief that you would recover. How did they do that?
Well, I think it was, you know, doctors in the West are taught how to communicate bad news. And I think that's extremely important because they give you information based on what you want to know and what you need to know, and it's calibrated in a manner that makes it easier for you to accept.
That doesn't happen in India?
No, communication is not taught at all to medical students in India. So most of them tend to avoid even discussing the diagnosis. Of course, they say the family puts pressure on them not to tell, but I don't think that lets the doctor off the hook.
When you were in that position yourself, did it help to know the worst?
It did. I think it did, because I needed to know what I was up against so that I could prepare my own defenses. Because it's fine, the doctors were dealing with my disease, but I was much more than the disease. I was a person with all kinds of aspirations, hopes. I had my child, I had my husband, I had my own belief system, which now needed to be re-examined and looked at in a new light. And I needed help to do that.
And knowing exactly what the situation was, the odds that you faced, helped you believe that you could recover.
I believe so, and the fact that I was treated in a very humane manner, that I was listened to, that no problem that I came up was considered too trivial or too small, and that at no stage was my self-esteem allowed to completely plummet.
Whereas in India, doctors usually treat cancer patients as if they are hopeless cases. They write them off. That must destroy the esteem of a patient.
Well, it does. I mean, they may not privately say that to the patient.
But they behave as if that's the case.
And I don't really blame them, because as I mentioned to you, Karan, with 80% of your cancer population coming with an advanced disease, you more or less don't expect them really to pull on beyond a few months and perhaps a year or so. So you already are battling with a situation that is against you. Whereas in the West now, the mood is much more upbeat. You're talking about 50% survival.
And your attempt when you came back to India with your own experience in mind was to set up institutions to give the same sort of support to cancer patients in India that you had yourself had in Canada.
Absolutely, because I realized the real fight was in the mind. The way I viewed my disease, the way I chose to grapple with it was important. And for that, I needed to meet other people who were well, who had had my kind of cancer, who epitomized the fact that, you know, you can carry on. And I felt it was important for people to have information.
And all of that strengthens the belief of the patient that he or she can recover, that this is not the end.
Exactly. I mean, at one point one has to understand that we're all terminal. And that it's really quality of life that matters at every step of our journey in life. And that's what we need to preserve, whether we have cancer or any other illness.
Preserving and guaranteeing the quality of life, in a sense, is what Cancer Sahyog and CanSupport does. Let's take a break, Harmala. I want to come back in part 2 and talk about the two institutions you set up, the challenges you face, and the difficulties you often have to overcome. That's the subject in a moment's time. See you after the break.
Kolkata is changing, and changing fast. So is the power company that brought India's first thermal power to Calcutta more than a century ago. Kolkata is shining, and shining bright, with India's most dependable power supply. From CESC, Kolkata is now growing, and will grow fast. So will CESC, with more megawatts from new plants. CESC, serving Calcutta since 1899.
1000 करोड़ क्यूबिक मीटर पानी, 4000 गांव में ऊर्जा, 800 psi फोर्स बनेगा।
400 साल पुराना शहर, 40 लाख प्रवासी, 40 फीट नीचे बनेगा।
72,000 झुग्गियां, 1 करोड़ की आबादी, 100 माले की बिल्डिंग बनेगा, बनेगा,
बनेगा, बनेगा।
Ultratech Cement, the engineer's choice. चलो इंडिया बनाएं।
Presented Claudio Bizarro with an opportunity.
नब्बे % मच्छर 6 से 8 के बीच घर में घुसते हैं, पर एक हिट तो पूरी रात फिट, क्योंकि घर आपका है।
Welcome to the Indira Gandhi Gandhi International Airport, New Delhi. Please remain seated till the aircraft has come to a complete halt. The temperature outside is 34 degrees Celsius. On behalf of the crew of this flight and Captain Samir Gupta, I thank you for flying Indian Airlines. It would be our pleasure to fly you again.
You're amongst your own with Indian Airlines.
Helping transform the lives of over 3 million people in rural India. ITC. Let's put India first.
हेलो फोर्स में कौन टूरिस्ट है फॉरेन पार्टी है आ रहा उड़ के
जब महीने भर मोबाइल रहने में लगे सिर्फ 200 रुपए तो हर कोई क्यों न ले एयरटेल
टॉप अप्पा नाउ ना
थोड़ा डीजल बचाते हैं
डीजल बचाने के लिए ये सब क्यों? ट्रक में डीजल नहीं टर्बोजेट डालो। HP टर्बोजेट यानी ज्यादा माइलेज वाला डीजल।
चली 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 ट्रक चली।
साल मनी बैक और आजीवन बीमा पॉलिसी का एक अनोखा मेल। LIC की जीवन रेखा।
लगता है आपकी घड़ी के दिन पूरे हो गए हैं। टाइटन एक्सचेंज ऑफर। किसी भी पुरानी घड़ी के बदले नई टाइटन घड़ी पर पाइए 25% की छूट।
Welcome back to People Who Matter. My guest is a lady who's dedicated her life to helping cancer patients, Harmala Gupta. In 1990, Harmala, you set up Cancer Sehog, and then 6 years later, you set up CanSupport to provide palliative care to cancer patients. How easy or how difficult was it to break through the barriers that surround cancer in India?
Well, initially it was difficult because the reaction I got when I said, I would like to come to the hospital and offer emotional support and the benefit of my own cancer experience, people said, well, that's a very Western concept, and in India we have the family, and therefore everyone can cope. We don't need you here.
But what about the fact that the family itself needs support?
Precisely, which is what I raised. I said the family itself needs support, and in the Indian system, the demands on the family are phenomenal, because not only are they caring for this person at home, they're running around making provision for money to buy the medicines, getting blood from here. You know, it's a harrowing experience.
And yet, despite the obvious need for the sort of support you were providing, there was a hesitation or a reservation to accept it.
I think so. I think the reservation, I suspect, was, what is she going to come and say to my patients?
Doctors were threatened.
I think they felt threatened, yes.
Hospitals felt you were invading their area of jurisdiction.
Exactly.
So they were all protecting their turf.
They were. And I think, but over time, fortunately, doctors realized that this was a very important aspect of care.
But was it a battle, in a sense, that you had to win with doctors to get entry access?
Well, it's true. We were fortunate that we did get access due to Dr. B.M. Kapoor, who was a surgeon at AIIMS at that time, and said, well, just, you know, sort of come into my particular clinic and let's see how it goes. So
as a sort of trial venture?
As a trial venture. And of course, it went so well that there was no stopping it after that.
But you had to prove yourself.
Absolutely, we
So
had to
in a
prove
sense, you were
ourselves.
on test before they accepted that you were doing something that was needed.
Yeah, because everyone would say, oh, you know, patients need money, and that goes on. They really need money, they don't need anything else. And that's simply not true, Karan, because in fact, if you are just going to reduce it to that, and are going to give handouts to people for their treatments, you are in fact whittling away their self-esteem even further. What you need to do is to help build them up so that they feel that they're worthwhile and that they need therefore to fight back.
Yet the amazing thing is that governments, and I'm talking of all governments of all parties, rather than come forward and support your ventures, have stayed aloof. Why have they not been more willing to associate themselves with you?
Well, the government has a wonderful cancer control program, but unfortunately it seems to concentrate more on the curative aspects, the treatment aspects. And I think that that's unfortunate. That's where most of the funds and money seems to go, considering that the majority of those who come with cancer need treatments that focus more on palliative care.
And yet the government, in a sense, is not concerned.
Is not concerned, and I guess that's because the doctors' lobby is strong, and so is the pharmaceutical lobby.
So then without government support and without access to government funds, where do you get the money for CanSupport and Cancer Sahayog?
It's ordinary people, Karan, who've been touched by cancer. They want to give back. They know what it's been like. And for them themselves, for their own healing and coming to terms with what has happened, they want to reach out to another person.
But what about corporate donations? Does the Indian corporate sector involve itself philanthropically in these sort of ventures?
No, unfortunately, we haven't had too much success, though we've had one or two trusts who have supported us and they have been associated with corporate houses. But on the whole, it has been disappointing.
You mean you knock on doors, you get smiles, but you don't get money?
Exactly. And you know, my question to the corporate houses is, you talk about corporate social responsibility. What does that mean? Does that just mean handing out money here and there to patients? No. I think it means much more.
Ironically, I gather it's diplomats, in a sense foreigners in India, who've come and helped you, embassies or individual people.
They have. We've had tremendous support from the British expatriate community in particular, and from all the diplomatic community, as you say, and this is because they have used hospice. These services are developed in their part of the world.
So they understand the need for hospice care and palliative care, which is why they're prepared to support it.
Exactly.
In India, the government doesn't understand it, and the corporate sector simply doesn't seem to want to know about it.
Absolutely. I mean, we are sort of almost a death-denying kind of society, I would say. Where
as you see Indians and their response to you, you must feel that they're very uncaring people, that rather than give and reach out to those who are suffering and dying, they wish to ignore them in the hope that they'll simply disappear.
Well, you know, Karan, it's been a mixed experience because I found that the patients who are very poor, who live in sort of communities that are very badly off, there's a sense of community there. They're supporting each other. It's terrific. But it seems to me that those of us who form the upper middle class and the middle class, our whole attempt is to kind of somehow build this gulf between us and the others.
You're saying a very interesting thing. The poor retain their sense of feeling and caring for others. The rich cut themselves off.
Yes, because the poor have no other access. They have no network. They have to depend on each other. That's the only way they can survive because there's no one else there to help them. Whereas we feel that we don't need the others.
A second practical problem that you face is that in India, oral morphine, which is commonly used in the West as an analgesic, simply isn't prescribed. It would help enormously for those who are in pain and suffering, yet it's not prescribed.
Well, I think there are two problems here, Karan. One is that it's not easily accessible unless you have a license for oral morphine.
And the other?
And the other is that our doctors are not trained to use it. There's a whole generation of doctors that were built up on, who were trained in this belief that oral morphine is addictive and hence should never be used. And yet there's a whole body of information available now which shows that it's the drug of choice for unremitting cancer pain
So you're
at
saying
the
that
end of
the
life.
limitation of our doctors, the limitation of their training and their experience is holding them back from prescribing a drug that could make an enormous difference to people who are suffering.
Absolutely, because they have all kinds of fears about using it simply because they haven't had the experience to use it.
So they need to go back and retrain and relearn. In a sense, their own inadequacies are becoming a problem for cancer patients.
Absolutely, it's standing in the way.
You, in a sense, have been plowing what I call a lonely furrow for 15 years. What keeps you going?
Well, Karan, I think that I've got a lot back in terms of what I've done. I felt that I need to earn the life that's been given back to me in a way by doing something that makes me feel good about myself.
This is, in a way, your opportunity to say thank you for the fact you recovered.
I think you're quite right. And I have this opportunity, and I know it's going to be a marathon, but I'm prepared for that.
So there is within you an inner drive that motivates you.
Very much so. It motivates me at day and night. I think that's very well put. I am driven.
How much of your life has it taken up?
It takes every waking hour. My whole life revolves around it. I'm sure much to the dismay perhaps of my husband and other members of my family.
I know that your husband understands, but does the family understand?
They do. I think they realize now that it's something that's very important, and I like to believe that they're even proud of the fact that I have taken steps that are improving in a small way the lives of other people afflicted with the same disease.
How do you see the future?
Well, I'm an optimist by temperament, Karan, so I don't give up hope. I believe we have already moved forward. When I started the first support group in 1990, it was the only one, the first of its kind. Now there are so many in all our metropolitan cities. So we have moved forward.
Indians are learning to care.
I think they are.
Slowly but steadily.
I'm sure. I think we are a caring people, but we have to now realize that it's in our best interest to be good citizens.
So horrors of all horrors, if that 75 million that are projected statistically to become cancer sufferers 20 years from now actually do become patients of cancer, they could have an easier time than many of those today because ventures like yours are succeeding.
Well, we hope so, because otherwise it's going to be terrible. They're going to die miserably, and it will be very sad indeed.
Harmala Gupta, on that rather sad note, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Karan, for having me here today.